Welcome, everybody, to Revolution Books for tonight's program. Presentation and discussion by Carl Dix, that's me, on the Imperialist Proxy War over Ukraine and the looming danger of World War III. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Take the sound off your phones. Turn them off, but at least take the sound off so that we're not interrupted by that. Bathrooms over here, and if you gotta go, just try to, as much as possible, not disrupt anything by doing it. And with that, let's get started. I want to welcome people to Revolution Books, both people who are here in person and those who are on the Zoom. Because, look, Revolution Books is a place that you need to get to know and that you need to visit and frequently if you're somebody who can't stand the world the way it is. If you're sick and tired of the way people are being treated as less than human. If you've dreamed of a different and better world, a place where people could really live and thrive, then you're in the right place. This is a bookstore that is the intellectual, political, and cultural center for a movement for an actual revolution. Look around the shelves, we've got books about the world and books for a new world. And at the heart of Revolution Books and its mission is the work of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, the architect of the new communism. And if you want to see that new world, then you got to get to know that revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, and there's a lot of ways you can do that. I'll speak about some of them as we go on tonight. From the books to the live programming that we do here, talks like this tonight, authors reading from their works. There's a vibrant dialogue and debate, curious minds engaging new ideas, and that's what people need to do today. There's a flyer, a welcome flyer, that has what events are coming up. We will be hosting an emergency response program soon to the fascist judge in Texas that is preparing to rule on the abortion pill. And there's an expectation that he's going to ban it. In other words, making the right of a woman to choose to have an abortion, or anybody who's pregnant to choose to have an abortion, something that is much more in question throughout the whole country. Not just in the states where the fascists have enough control to pass abortion bans on a state level. They're going to wipe out an important access to abortion rights on a national level. And that's something that we have to be ready to respond to, and Revolution Books is planning on an emergency response, and you should stay in touch with the bookstore to find out the details on that when it comes down. Okay, now tonight, like I said, Imperialist Proxy War over Ukraine and the looming danger of World War III. And I'm Carl Dix. I'm going to give the presentation. And look, I'm a long-time revolutionary. I'm a follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. My revolutionary activity goes back to the 1960s. I'll talk about it some tonight. I was part of the largest mass refusal of USGIs, of orders to go to Vietnam. The Fort Lewis 6, that was back in 1970, I believe. And when I came out of Leavenworth Military Penitentiary, I went looking for the revolution and connected up with it right then and there. And that's a path that I've been on, ever since. And I think that's enough about me for right now. What I want to do is get into this presentation and lay the basis for discussion. Okay. Now look, humanity's facing a dangerous moment right now. A real threat of world war with nuclear-armed combatants facing off against each other. I mean, last week a U.S. drone was taken down by Russian fighter planes. Yet most people are sleepwalking as the world gets dragged closer than it's ever been to nuclear war and the possible extinction of human civilization. Or they're buying the lies that the U.S. and its mouthpieces in the media are selling them. This has got to change, and we have to take it on ourselves to change it quickly. 20 years ago this month, 20 years ago this month, the U.S. invasion of Iraq. An invasion based on lies about weapons of mass destruction and ties to terrorist groups. An illegal invasion that caused massive death and destruction in Iraq. Just one example of what the U.S. did in Iraq. They flattened the city of Fallujah. And that was their term. We flattened that motherfucker. And they weren't lying. Fallujah was a city of 300,000 people that had existed since the time of the Babylonian Empire. Long time. Millennia. Thousands of years. The U.S. reduced it to rubble with its bombing runs, artillery strikes, in order to take back control of the city from people in that area who had been resisting the U.S. occupation. Think about that when you hear their talk about crimes being committed by Putin. And I'm going to talk about it because Putin is committing war crimes at this point. But let's actually think about, whose pile of war crimes will reach the highest. The country that carried out the flattening of Fallujah, the U.S., has carried out crimes against humanity and war crimes. Many, many crimes against humanity and war crimes, both before flattening Fallujah and since flattening Fallujah. Now they're telling us that they're a force for good in the world. This is bullshit. And I'm going to speak to why it's bullshit tonight. I'm going to do this as a revolutionary, a follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, the architect of the new communism and the foremost political thinker and leader on the planet today. And I'm going to do it as an internationalist, somebody who proceeds from the interest of world humanity, and someone who is attempting to, with my comrades in a movement for an actual revolution, shouldering the special responsibility that people who live here in the belly of the beast, as we used to say back in the 1960s, and I still say it because it aptly describes the monstrous imperialist beast that we live in. We have a responsibility to oppose this imperialist empire and to do all we can to get rid of it as soon as possible, in the only way that can really be done, through a real revolution. And I'm also speaking to this as a veteran of the U.S. Army. I got drafted in the 1960s, and they gave me orders to go to Vietnam. Now, back then, the U.S. was portraying itself as doing something good for the people in Vietnam, and I didn't have the faintest idea what was going on. But I knew enough to know that I needed to know this was something I should be a part of. And if it wasn't, I just shouldn't fucking go. I couldn't rely on what the government was telling us. I couldn't rely on what they were telling us in the military. I had to go and talk to people, veterans who had been there. I talked to people who were out in the streets protesting the war in Vietnam. That's how I found out what was going on out there. And what it came down to was I found out the U.S. was treating every Vietnamese person, man, woman, and child as the enemy that they were fighting. The U.S. was bombing villages, using chemical weapons like Agent Orange and white phosphorus that caused death and deformities to very many people in Vietnam and poisoned the environment of that country. I couldn't be a part of that kind of war. And together with 5 other GIs, I refused those orders. Ended up in the Leavenworth Military Penitentiary, like I told you before, for that crime. And while in prison, I came to see that the horrors that were being perpetrated in Vietnam had a common source with the horrors that black people were facing in this country and other oppressed people, with the situation that women were struggling for liberation against, with other horrors that were coming down. And that was the system that we were living under. I came to understand it as being a capitalist imperialist system. And that to get rid of those horrors, we had to get rid of this system. So I came out of prison 2 years, after doing 2 years, looking to connect up with the revolution. And that's what I've been on and with ever since. Now let's get right up to what's going on in the world today. Essentially what's going on is the U.S. is declaring to any and all rivals that it's determined to maintain its position as the top power in the world, that it's ready to meet any challenges to that position and crush them. Russia and China in particular, both also imperialist powers in their own right, are equally determined to break out of the position that the U.S. has them cornered into as lesser imperialists, with less range and reach to exploit and oppress people in different parts of the world. Now, the U.S. is waging a proxy war with Russia over Ukraine, and that's something that I'll get into in a minute. Just let me speak briefly to China. In this past year, Biden has 4 times threatened to send U.S. military forces to the island of Taiwan to counter any Chinese military moves against it. Now, he said that even though the U.S. officially does not recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Officially, they recognize it as part of China. But the U.S. is going to send troops to get involved in anything that happens between mainland China and Taiwan. The U.S. has also ramped up economic warfare against China, expanded its military presence in the Philippines and other places in the Pacific Ocean, and conducted military exercises with Japan. And you remember they shot down several Chinese balloons that they're like, I don't know, we think they might have been weather devices or something, but they were Chinese, and they didn't have no fucking business floating over our country, so we had to take them out. All this amounts to delivering a message to China that they will not be allowed to challenge the U.S. position in the Pacific, right around China. They're not saying, well, we're not going to let you come to San Francisco. They're saying you can't come very many miles off your coastline without running up into us. Now in Europe, the imperialist maneuvering has the U.S. moving to surround and hem in Russia, and Russia trying to break out and establish a rival pole of power in Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The U.S. has pushed its military alliance, NATO, right up to Russia's borders, and Russia responded by launching an invasion of Ukraine to that. And let's be clear, that was an illegal invasion, and it's been carried out in a way that is immoral. That's just a fact. That's real about it. But what it comes down to is these two imperialist gangsters indirectly fighting each other. Russia's raining down death and destruction on the people of Ukraine. And at the same time, the U.S. is fighting back, not with its own forces, but using the Ukrainians as cannon fodder in an effort to weaken their strategic rival of Russia. And the U.S. Secretary of State openly said that very early on in the war. Our aim here is to weaken Russia. And then you have the downing of that U.S. drone. That was essentially an act of warfare. Now, this tells you how close the world is to direct military conflict between two nuclear-powered rivals. And that's how close the world is to that. These imperialists are willing to risk World War III and a nuclear Armageddon, which could possibly lead to the end of human civilization. And it's a huge problem that most everybody in this country is going on with their lives like not much is happening. I mean, people got to wake the fuck up. And that means they got to be challenged to wake the fuck up. Not, left to come up, to rise up, wake up off of their own volition, but challenged to get out of that sleepwalking. It's on us to do something about all of this. And that is why the RevComs have issued a call for people to take to the streets across the country on April 2nd in nationwide protests. And coming off of that, to mobilize more powerful nationwide protests on May 1st. And in doing that, they're raising 3 slogans. First, no U.S.-NATO war with Russia. Stop U.S. threats against China. Second, no World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. And third, we don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution. Now we're going to back up to this proxy war point. What is that? What does that mean? Well, what it has meant is on the military front, the U.S. began by supplying basic weaponry and ammunition. They escalated that to providing more, sophisticated, destructive, and lethal equipment like rockets, missile systems, anti-aircraft systems, and tanks. They're also helping to guide Ukraine's war effort. That drone that got shot down, it was actually doing surveillance. And usually a military does its own surveillance to figure out what the targets are, what the terrain looks like. Well, the U.S. is doing that for the Ukrainian army, supplying it with that intelligence and helping to direct how it goes about coming back against the Russian forces. The U.S. has also set up supply and training bases in NATO countries close to Ukraine. Economically, they've imposed a wide range of sanctions against the Russian economy aimed at crippling it, and also through that undermining Putin's support in Russia and hoping to bring into being a situation where he could be deposed. And then on the ideological front in this country, they're whipping up a patriotic USA chauvinistic frenzy to generate support for their war effort against Russia. And too many people are being taken in by this. And look, yes, this war is causing tremendous suffering and devastation in Ukraine. 8 million people forced to flee their home country. 6 million more driven out of where they live, but becoming internal refugees in another part of the Ukraine. Women have been subjected to rape and sexual assault, and children have been kidnapped from Ukraine and taken into Russia. We see and hate all of these horrors of this destruction and devastation. But for the leaders of the U.S., they see opportunity. They're licking their chops, seeing the possibility to throw Ukrainians to the meat grinder in service of weakening the U.S.'s imperialist rival Russia, and through that to greatly expand the presence and dominance of NATO throughout Europe and beyond. For the U.S., the Ukrainian people are cannon fodder in their contest with Russia. And anything done to them is collateral damage. Now, they've got their reasons for why people should support them. They tell us every day that this is a fight between democracy and autocracy. And of course, the U.S. is on the democracy side, and you should support them. And hey, the U.S. is the good guys in the world. You should know that. Everybody should know that. Well, this is bullshit. Again, people need to wake the fuck up. And that means we have to go out and challenge them on that. That speaks again to the first slogan that the RevComs have issued. That is, no U.S.-NATO war with Russia, stop U.S. threats against China. What this war really is, and look, you can call Russia an autocratic country. Putin is working on making himself president for life. He is suppressing the rights of people to dissent against him. LGBTQ plus people are being demonized and criminalized. That's a fair description. But what about the U.S. side? What makes them the democratic side on this? I mean, their alliance includes Turkey, where they've got a president, Erdogan is his name, who's working as fucking hard as Putin to make himself president for life, frankly. He is also violently suppressing the Kurdish population in his country, as well as repressing dissent and other things among other sections of people in Turkey. Hungary's another NATO country, part of this alliance. The guy, Viktor Orban, their leader, is seen as a model by the fascists grouped around Donald Trump. They do excursions to Hungary to learn on how he's carrying out what he does there in terms of reducing any role for the judiciary to check what his political party that has dominance in Hungary right now can do. He's also criminalizing and demonizing the LGBTQ plus population. And then there's Poland, which has inflicted and is enforcing a near total ban on abortion. One that the Christian fascists here in this country kind of can only wish they could put into place. These are some of the elements of this democratic coalition that you're supposed to be supporting. But let's go more to the heart of it. I'm not going to concede, well, there's some Democrats in there and then there's some autocrats who are kind of following along with them. Let's talk about Britain and France. They're supposed to be democratic countries, right? Well, these democratic countries spent centuries sending their military around the world, conquering and colonizing people, subjecting them to brutality, misery, and degradation, and stealing their resources and wealth. And now they sit atop the spoils of all of that and dole some of them out to their people. And this is the basis for the democracy that they represent. But what they actually represented globally was exploitation and oppression, and vicious exploitation and savage oppression on a global scale. And then that brings us to the top of NATO. And that's the good old USA, the leading power in NATO. And this is a country, one of the good guys in the world, that was founded on genocide and slavery. It sits on land that was stolen from the native inhabitants. And it continues to carry out horrific oppression targeting black people, other people of color, women, immigrants, and the LGBTQ plus people. On top of all that, the U.S. has invaded and occupied countries all around the world, subjected people it had conquered to massacres, plunder. The U.S. in its military adventures has treated women as spoils of war. to be raped at will, to be forced into being prostitutes servicing the U.S. military force. You know, the exact, I'm missing the term, but, you know, some people may have heard about the comfort women that Korean women were forced to be in relation to the Japanese military. Well, the U.S. doesn't give it an official name, but they did the same thing in the Philippines, in Vietnam, and many, many other places. This is the U.S., the leading power in NATO. And if anybody wants to say, well, that was a long time ago, Carl, they've changed. They don't do that now. Well, when the fuck did they stop doing it? Did they stop in Afghanistan? Well, I guess they don't do it right now because they got chased out. But up until they got chased out, what were they doing in Afghanistan? And it was the same kind of stuff. There also was a new twist in Afghanistan, though. The U.S. bombed many wedding celebrations because Afghani tradition is that villages come together to hold a celebration to mark the new wedding and all like that. And look, there's a lot of Afghani tradition that is no damn good, you know, because it trades in subjugation of women and all like that. But this is not a wedding celebration is not something that should be bombed. But for the U.S., it was a gathering of Afghani people, and that meant it probably had some terrorists there in their thinking. So it was a legitimate anti-terrorist target, and they bombed many, many of those celebrations. This is what the U.S. has done. And all of these horrors were carried out in pursuit of achieving the maintenance and expansion of the U.S. area of domination and suppression and exploitation and oppression. The U.S. is responsible for a list of outrages that, to borrow from the abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, would disgrace a nation of savages. See, and people have to open their eyes and confront the reality that this country and its ruling class are not and have never been the good guys in the world. From the beginning, they have pursued a thing of maximizing their ability to exploit and oppress people around the world. And that's what they're doing today in this proxy war over Ukraine. We've got to recognize it, see it for what it is, and confronting the world with and act to stop it. See, because there's an especially dangerous dynamic in effect now. Both sides in this proxy war are committing to winning. Neither side feels that they can back down. Both see that as surrendering. And there was a comment from a guy named Medvedev, I forget his first name, leading Russian politician. He's kind of like Putin's wingman. You know, he traded the presidency with Putin when term limits forced Putin to step down. And then after one term, he stepped out so Putin could come back in. That's how much he's his wingman. What this guy had to say is, nuclear powers do not lose wars. And his point was, in case anybody missed it, he clarified it, we've got these weapons. And if it looks like we're losing, what's to keep us from using them? And that is what the world faces right now. Each side is going to escalate, retaliate, escalate. Russia might attack a NATO facility in a country that borders on Ukraine, calling it a rear its enemy, which actually it is. It's a rear area where its enemy is being supplied and trained and all like that. Or they might go after U.S. intelligence assets that are assisting the Ukrainian war effort, like they did with that drone. The U.S. or NATO might respond to something like this with a further attack or a direct attack on Russian forces. Or Russia might feel like it needs to resort to tactical nuclear weapons, which are not the big city-destroying weapons that both sides have, but will change the nature of the warfare by their destructive ability that they would bring to bear on it. See, and this gets you to and across the nuclear threshold. This is something that could occur and happen based on a trajectory that's not fully under the control of these people. And once you begin something like that, it's not something you can back away from. See, and all these people who are thinking, that's way over there, this doesn't have anything to do with my life, you will find that a nuclear war will not respect your lane. Its destructive power will blast right through it. The radiation that spreads, I don't think you can set up a barrier to keep it out. The effect of nuclear winter, no, you can't deal with it that way. And we should also remember that there's only one country in the world that's ever used nuclear weapons, and that's the United States. This is the importance of the second slogan that the RevComs raised for April 2nd. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. And to make that slogan real, we've got to go to work to rapidly transform the situation. I mean, right now, very few people are standing up to resist the war moves that the U.S. is making. And almost no one is doing it on terms that are required to really meet it. You know, and I have to say there's I believe, yeah, here it is. There is this piece here. It is actually a polemic around some of the demands that have been raised as what should headline an anti-war thrust in this country. Its main slogan is fund people's needs, not the war machine. And look, that is not the way to build a movement against the war in this country. Funding people's needs, not the war machine. You're directing people's attention narrowly to their own pocketbooks in the face of massive death and destruction in Ukraine that is at the fulcrum of potential conflict between nuclear armed powers and the threat of world war. And you have to raise people's sights to that and challenge them to stand up and not go with that. The other thing about it is we're dealing with an imperialist superpower. It does not proceed from funding people's needs. It proceeds from crushing any rivals to its position in the world. That's what the U.S. goes on. So it is illusory to talk about getting them to shift from having a war machine that can contend with its rivals to meeting people's needs. And look, fucking part of the reason people got needs is because they're being exploited and oppressed by this imperialist superpower as well. This piece here goes into this more deeply than I want to right now. People should read it, though, to get a sense of what's necessary and what we're trying to actually do here. The stakes are sky high. The proxy war over Ukraine is bringing close to world war and a nuclear Armageddon that, like I said, could threaten human civilization and the planet itself. People got to take their heads out of the sand because, you know, you can put your head in the sand, but that won't keep your ass from getting incinerated by what the fuck is going on in this world and what's looming on the horizon. People have to be confronted to break out of the hold that American chauvinism has on them. People are being whipped up into a patriotic frenzy. And we got to tell people that they got you thinking like Americans And you got to stop thinking that way. You got to start thinking about the interest of humanity. One way they go at this is they're trying to train people to reflexively tell veterans of the U.S. military, thank you for your service. Well, what the fuck is that? Thank you for your service. You say that to a veteran. Do you know if they were part of the flattening of Fallujah? And is that a service you want to thank them for? Do you know if they were involved in the bombing of Afghan families at their wedding celebrations? And is that a service you want to thank them for? And if they're older people, because people who are involved in that would be of a certain younger set. If they're more like my age and they're a veteran, then you got to say, well, were you part of that slaughter that America carried out in Vietnam? Because if that's their service, you should not want to thank them for that. You should want to tell them, fuck you for your service. And don't tell me, well, you got to get with the U.S. because, look, Putin is committing crimes. The International Court even said he's committing crimes. They indicted him. That makes it real clear, right? Well, first off, the U.S. previously condemned that International Court, said it had no authority, it was a renegade court, it shouldn't be allowed to prosecute anybody. Now, why did they say that before? Because the court made noises about putting U.S. military figures on trial for crimes that they had carried out in Iraq and in Afghanistan. That the U.S. thought was not to be allowed. But now that they are indicting an enemy of the U.S., it's like, okay, now you're cool. Right. Now we good with you. And they're using that, to try to underscore this thing of we're the good guy, they're committing crimes. And look, there's a lot of evidence that those crimes are being committed by Russian military forces. But even if Putin has done everything that the court has charged him with and more, his crimes would be small change compared to the invasions, the coups, the mass murder counterinsurgencies that the U.S. has perpetrated around the world. And look, I know a lot of people rightly say that black GIs were never given the credit or recognition for the service that they gave to this country in World War I and World War II and other wars. But whatever your intentions, wanting to celebrate the Harlem Hellfighters, other black military units who have, participated in the wars of this country and wanting to fight to get them their recognition for what they did for this country, doing that right now is contributing to the war hysteria. Whether that's what you want to do or not, or your intention or not, that's what comes out of that. People got to look at that and see that that is not in the interest of humanity and step away from it. What is in the interest of humanity is spoken to in a quote from Bob Avakian. Here's what he said. It is vitally important for the masses of people in this country and other countries aligned with it, as well as in Russia, for people everywhere to finally and fully wake up now, recognize the real and profoundly heavy stakes involved, and act in accordance with our actual interests, the interest of all of humanity, demanding that this war in Ukraine and the involvement, direct and indirect, of the imperialists on both sides in this war be stopped before it not only causes even greater suffering for the people of Ukraine, but possibly escalates into a far more terrible conflict, which causes massive destruction and death on a whole other level, and even possibly poses a threat to the very existence of humanity itself. And in another quote, Avakian said, what is called for and urgently now is to oppose all imperialist marauders and mass murderers and all the systems and relations of oppression and exploitation, while giving particular emphasis to opposing our own imperialist oppressors who commit their monstrous crimes in our name and seek to rally us to support them on the basis of a grotesque American chauvinism, which we must firmly reject and fiercely struggle against. I believe you were going to do a clip of Avakian.
Masses of people in the world, and this is very acutely and urgently posed now, the masses of people in the world cannot any longer afford. It was always terrible that these are the people ruling the world, but it's now acutely posed. We can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and to determine the destiny of humanity. They need to be overthrown as quickly as possible.
Righteous on that. Yeah. This is the understanding that inspired the call issued by the Revcoms for the nationwide protest on August, boy, let me get this right, April 2nd, raising these slogans: no U.S.-NATO war with Russia, stop U.S. threats against China, no World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. We don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution. And moving forward off of the protests on April 2nd, we're going to go forward to mobilize more powerful protests on May 1st, raising the same three slogans. Our aim in doing this is to bring onto the scene a force right here in the belly of the beast, of the number one imperialist beast, that is building determined resistance to its war moves. This force needs to become a powerful pole of resistance to the threat of world war and nuclear Armageddon that is looming over humanity. One that the rulers will have to take into account as they plot their every step in their maneuvering against their imperialist rivals. One that could force them to pull back from the brink of extinction that these rival imperialists have dragged humanity to. And look, we're taking up April 2nd here in this city and different cities across the country. Those who are watching us on Zoom, wherever you are, get in touch with us if you want to connect with this. And we can hook you up with efforts to bring protests on April 2nd into being, or you could even start one, frankly. You could get on in on that tip. Here tonight, we have a table in the back that you could connect with people who are organizing for April 2nd. That's Larry back there who can wave his hand again so people could look and see who you are. Check in with him. He's got material that people could take. And we're going to pull together an organizing committee for the April 2nd protest. It's going to meet Sunday at 3 o'clock here at Revolution Books. And we're going to begin to work on how are we going to do this? How can we go out and take this message to people that we're up against the threat of world war coming out of this war effort that has these rival imperialists going up against each other indirectly now, but could swiftly move to them being directly at each other, and that we don't accept your future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution, because their future, these wars are a part of their future. What's also a part of their future is the destruction of the very environment of the planet that we live on. I mean, there was just a report from somebody of the UN that, following up on an earlier report that said, well, if we don't get global warming down to this level, we may reach a point where we can never get it back down. Well, they've gotten closer to that point, and that report is bringing that out. And that's something that this capitalist imperialist system is bringing down on humanity. Because what these rival imperialists are fighting for is maintaining this cruel, deadly world as it is and fighting over who gets the lion's share of the plunder from it. And they are bringing humanity closer to even greater horrors, including existential ones, meaning ones that where the very existence of humanity and the planet are being called into question. This is really a crucial time, and it's bringing us up against two choices that Bob Avakian laid out a few years back. Either we make revolution and put an end to this system, to the wars it produces, to the brutality, misery, and degradation it perpetrates on black people and other oppressed people, to the subjugation it subjects women to the destruction of the environment, of the very planet we live on, or we condemn humanity to continue to endure all this suffering and the even worse horrors looming on the horizon. Because look, the way the world is today is not the only world that's possible. Through a real revolution, one that unleashes and leads millions of people to overthrow this system, defeating and dismantling its institutions of violent suppression, and going on to build a totally different and far better system in its place, one with different institutions that will unleash, lead, and back up people in ending the horrors of today, creating new relations between people and relations between people and nature to produce what's needed and distribute it in a way that it can benefit all and not go for the profits of a few. That's the kind of world we could bring into being through revolution. I mean, we should have a world where children don't have to lose their childhood because they have to work in mines producing the precious metals needed for cell phones, or in sweatshops, producing for the global market. All of this stuff is not needed, where women are full human beings and not treated like sex objects or breeders or kept under the thumb of some man. In a world where weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons no longer exist. That's the kind of world we should live in. And look, the revolution has said that it will not have nuclear weapons. Not only it won't use them, it will not have them. Because we won't play the game of, well, we'll have them, but we're not going to use them. We're just using them as a deterrent to keep somebody else from coming at us. No. We can't be using nuclear weapons because they are just weapons of mass destruction. They're weapons to kill many, many people. That's not a way that the revolution can go about fighting even to defend itself. This and more is all laid out in this Constitution for a Future Socialist Republic in North America that was authored by Bob Avakian. The kind of world that we're talking about is real, and it really can be brought into being. Especially now is a time to be looking at and moving to act on that because of the deep splits at the top of society among the rulers and emanating all the way down through society as the fascists push ahead with their white supremacist, women-hating, immigrant demonizing, and anti-LGBTQ agenda. And as it becomes clearer and clearer to people that the Democrats' answer to this is vote for us. That's their answer. Oh, you don't like the attacks on abortion? Vote for us. You don't like the way they're taking away the voting rights of black people? Vote for us. Not that they're doing anything about those. It's their way of staying in power and keeping their system going. And that's what they're fighting with the fascists over, not should the system work for the people or not, because they both were representing a capitalist imperialist system that oppresses and exploits people. But it's like, what's the best way to keep it going? The revolutionary leader that I've talked about, Bob Avakian, calls this a rare time when revolution becomes more possible, because that infighting at the top, the fact that the fascists are pushing ahead and the Democrats have no answer, reveals vulnerability in the system and creates an opening where a revolutionary answer to the problems can emerge on the scene and become a real pole of attraction. And it's a time when everyone who hates the horrors of this system forces so many people to endure needs to engage with the RevComs, to learn about the movement for a real revolution they're building, and to get involved with it even as you learn more. And there are many ways to get involved. I mean, one way, Revolution Books is a way through which you can get involved. You're here tonight, don't be a stranger. If you're new to it, don't be a stranger. Come back. If you've been here, get more involved in its setup and what it's doing. You can talk with Jane, I believe.
Yep.
Or Brenda. That's her there. About that. You also need to watch the Bob Avakian interviews. A hardcore revolutionary and heart and soul for the people. You'll meet a revolutionary leader there, the likes of which you probably have never seen before. You'll be challenged with a view of the world and why it is the way it is, but also how it could be totally transformed. And you'll come off of it looking at things and thinking about things in a new way. So you got to check those interviews out. And then you also got to check out the Revolution Nothing Less show, which is where you can find those interviews, but where you can also find a weekly show that goes at the big questions and developments that are going on in the world and speaks to how to fight against the horrors and to transform the situation. It also speaks to how not to do that. So there are a lot of ways to go at that, and I really urge you and encourage you to do that and to get with the Revolution Nothing Less show. It comes on YouTube. It premieres every Thursday, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock West Coast time, and I'm not going to try and figure all the other ones out. You can work that out on your own. So that's what I wanted to say tonight. Now what I want to do is just open it up and let's talk about it. I mean, how are people here today, whether they're in person here in Revolution Books or in the Zoom that we're doing, how are you looking at the situation? What do you see in it? What questions do you have? What ideas do you have about going at it? So that may be an anticlimactic end to my presentation, but it's the end.
Could you announce that people on Zoom can put their questions in the chat?
Okay. If you're on Zoom, the way to pose your questions, comments, observations, suggestions is by putting them in the chat. And then I believe we have a microphone.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I'm just holding it.
I know you're holding it. I assume that if you wanted to use it, you would have already started. So don't be shy. I mean, I know I may have laid out a lot for you to think about, but dive in.
So I agree this is a struggle between two imperialist powers. You mentioned the Russian atrocities, but I think, and it doesn't matter which side is committing worse atrocities, they're both committing atrocities. The Ukrainians are committing even more atrocities. They even try to blow up one of their own nuclear power plants. The Zelensky government is calling for NATO to give them nukes so they can take out a Russian city. And there's also from 2014 their attacks on the Luhansk, Luhansk breakaway republic, in which they've killed over 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So I think this underscores the point that the U.S. government is using the Ukrainians as proxies. They don't care about the Ukrainian people. And there's no side that any working class or any person that wants a revolution can be on. And since we're in the U.S., I think we have to say no to any kind of militarism, sending weapons to Ukraine, NATO, all of that. All of that has to be stopped. And could you address this, please? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, you brought in, I actually didn't speak that much to developments within the Ukrainian forces. And if I had gotten into it, I would have to bring in that the Ukrainian forces are a range of forces. You know, and they're the good guys. They're the ones who came under attack. Well, some of them are. Ukraine was illegally invaded. That is real. But some of the forces who fought back on the Ukrainian side, there's the Azov Brigade, which openly upholds Adolf Hitler and the Nazis from World War II. So there are forces within that that are definitely not worthy of being supported. But the main point and the main question, which I believe is also your main question, is that neither side is any good. And that was the point that I was trying to bring home through this, that what you're talking about here are rival imperialists. One of them is a much more powerful imperialist with a much greater international reach, exploiting and oppressing many more peoples and countries around the world. One of them is a lesser imperialist. But they're both imperialists. They both want to do the same thing, and they are contending over who is going to get to do it at this point in a particular part of the world, which each is looking to extend and spread elsewhere. Because, you know, there was a time when Germany was a lesser imperialist power that wanted to extend its ability to oppress and exploit people in the world. And world wars came out of that. And Germany actually moved from lesser to being a very powerful imperialist force that was able to wreak havoc through much of the world. So people really need to look at it and look at the fact that the different factor in this, and that different factor is the nuclear armed combatants on both sides and what that could mean for the world. Now, they should not look at it in ways that some forces have looked at it in the past. Well, that means give up on revolution, come to some kind of rapprochement or some kind of agreement with it, which would be an agreement that keeps in effect the exploitation and oppression of people throughout the world. It's got to be moving to rally people to see that their interests are in line with the interest of the great majority of humanity. That it's not only that opposing this war and acting to stop it is what's in the interest of humanity. And we are coming at that and rallying others to begin to see that we not only need to stop this war, we need to get to the source of this war. And that is the system of capitalism, imperialism, that drags the world towards war, that is responsible for that horror, but also all of the other horrors that humanity is facing. And like Avakian said in that last quote that we used, that quote that we used on the video, humanity can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the globe and determine the fate of humanity. They must be overthrown as quickly as possible. And while people are thinking, come on with other questions, April 2nd is an opportunity to begin to go to work on that. And we're not expecting that April 2nd itself will be large and powerful. It's going to begin small. Let's just be real about that. But we want to fashion something that is impactful, it's hard-hitting, that takes this message out in a way that many more people will see it. And frankly, some will feel confronted by it. Some will feel like, and I guess, well, let me say this. Some of the people who are working on April 2nd now earlier went out to a concert done by the band Pussy Riot that was an effort to support the Ukraine in its war against Russia. They went out to that with two flags, the American flag and the Russian flag. They put it on the ground, and they stood on it. And then in opposition to, because people were getting a lot of information about criminal things that the Russian forces had done in this war. So the Revcoms went out with visual displays of the crimes of the American empire. So they made very clear they didn't think much of either of these empires. And we're here tonight to tell you about what this empire, the one that you're being told is the good guys in the world, this is what it has done in the world. And on that basis, they were talking about people need to oppose these rulers, the ones here in this country, oppose their war efforts, and actually become a part of an actual revolution to get rid of this ruling class and its capitalist imperialist system. Excuse me. Actually, there's water here.
Hey, just to amplify on this point you're making in your talk earlier. I mean, I haven't heard any evidence about the Ukrainians asking for nuclear weapons. So I'm not so sure about that.
Well, that's true.
Okay.
He went to the Congress, U.S. Congress, and asked them for that.
Not for nuclear. Well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about.
Sure of a lot of things.
Well, I'm operating on the basis of science here, and certainly Ukraine has gone to the Congress and asked for weapons, but not nuclear weapons. But the main point I wanted to make is that. Why do we say this is a proxy war? If this was simply a question of Ukraine being invaded by Russia and the imperialist powers weren't involved, then you could talk about a genuine issue of sovereignty and national independence and so on. But the contradiction is that this very quickly became a war that was largely directed and in many ways fought directly by the U.S. through the Ukrainian people. With the U.S., as Carl was saying, supplying the weapons, the intelligence that was needed to direct those weapons, choosing the targets, when and where to strike, and that this was all part of, which Zelensky is fully a party of, and is a champion of, a whole strategy by the U.S. to defeat and weaken Russia in order to dominate Europe and the rest of the world, as Carl was saying. So so it isn't so much that they're good and bad guys within Ukraine, although that is absolutely true. It's what's the overall character of this war, and what is the character of what the Ukrainian forces and government are part of.
Something coming up in the chat? Oh, I see you writing over there. I thought you were.
I'm going to give you a note in a second on this fact checking.
Okay. Are you raising your...
Just putting my... Well, all right, I'll take a stab. One of the things that... Is this on?
Yeah, hold it from the top.
Hold it from the top, up here? Okay. One of the things that Bob Avakian has identified as a real problem here in this country and related to the world is what he calls American chauvinism, that a lot of the ignorance and ignoring and going about one's business in America is founded on the accepting that America's for doing good in the world, you know. And I guess I just was trying to think through all the different ways in which that, you know, this is the part I was trying to put together a little more before I spoke, but look, you know, the whole way capitalism and imperialism works, we are bound together by people all around the world. The garment workers in the factories in Bangladesh, the children in the mines throughout Africa, which, you know, makes possible the cell phones, you know, the mineral coltan that goes in the cell phones, the children that, you know, never get to go to school. We're actually bound together. The lives of American people are bound very tightly. You know, I don't think you maybe went too much into what do we mean by imperialism, but this is one of the things we mean. And, you know, you can identify a morality question about being opposed to this war and being, frankly, opposed to anything American imperialism tries to defend in the world, with 750 military bases that they're now adding because now they're the whole thing with China. They're now building new bases in the Philippines. You know, that this really has nothing to do with the interests of anybody in the world. I guess that's the point I wanted to try to bring out a little bit, that our interests are not the same as the interests of any imperialist power. And this American chauvinism, you know, the people here sitting on the heap of everything I was just describing is just, it's just disgusting, you know. And I just see that what, you know, April 2nd could be in a beginning way is to begin to crack through that and force people to see what their lives, you know, what the foundation of the whole position of American lives is. So anyway, that was what I wanted to kind of add to a whole dimension to your presentation.
Okay, thank you for that. The floor is open for others to step into the discussion, either in relation to things that have been raised or to bring in different things. On the point that, well, maybe people couldn't hear it because she wasn't mic'd, but Brenda, who's working the Zoom, did some fact-checking. And on this question of did Zelensky ask or raise the question of the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the English subtitles on his speech to Congress did say that he suggested NATO could use nukes. It was later said by the Associated Press, that's AP, that this was the result of a mistranslation.
Oh, yeah, right.
I mean, look, I have no ability to translate or understand any of the languages from that part of the world. It does, you know, so I don't know. I mean, to mistranslate nuclear weapons, I don't know.
May I address that?
I mean, you can address it. I was just going to say,
Right.
Okay, we have a question from the Zoom. If it's brief, go ahead.
It'll be brief. My whole point is I still stand in full solidarity with the anti-imperialist line of RCP and all of that. So the point I'm making is a minor point, and I don't want it to be a dividing line between us, that the Ukrainian government is every bit as hard right, in fact, way harder right than the Putin government. That doesn't mean I support Putin. It means that the Ukrainian government, independent of what the Russians are doing to them and independent of U.S. imperialism, is a fascist Nazi government, and that's an indication that the U.S. doesn't care who they align themselves with. That's all I'm saying. Peace. Not to the imperialists.
Okay. All right. I'm going to entertain this question that came up from the Zoom. The question was, how about current tensions in Syria? How might they be understood and what might it portend? And I'm pretty sure that this is in reference to the fact that the U.S. carried out a strike in Syria aiming at an area where some forces that have some connections to Iran are operating in Syria. The Syrian government has actually requested support from Iran, so those forces are there with the okay of the Syrian government. And the U.S. said that it was responding to a drone attack that killed an American contractor and injured some U.S. military forces in Syria. A couple of things about that. The U.S. is in Syria. That's one thing that I don't know that many people know that, but the fact that these U.S. military forces were injured by a drone in Syria tells you the U.S. has its military fingers directly in Syria, not just indirect. They're in there. They're acknowledging that, and they are striking back, and through it, they're hitting not just Syria, but they're hitting Iran. And that is another force that the U.S. has viewed as illegitimately challenging its interest in the world. They raised that in relation to the war in Iraq, and it several times threatened to go after Iran. A leading figure in the Iranian government and military, Suleiman, I forget his whole name, was assassinated by the U.S. in response for what some resistance forces in that part of the world did in relation to Saudi Arabia, I believe, which is a close U.S. ally. And when you think about that, a major political figure in Iran was assassinated by the U.S. because some forces that Iran was working with carried out an operation that the U.S. didn't like. I mean, just think about that. You know, if Iran did something like that the other way around, that would be like, oh, this is war. We're getting down. That's how the U.S. would see that. But they feel it's legitimate for them to carry out these kinds of assassinations, even though I think there are actually international agreements and things like that that rule out doing these kinds of things. And we should also talk about why are there such international agreements and regulations, and they are mainly because the U.S. was fucking going around and assassinating leaders in different countries around the world. I mean, and we could just put together a list of them. The one that I would start with is Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. You know, he led the independence movement in the Congo, and when Belgium was forced to leave, he gave a speech recognizing that as a momentous day. And fucking Dwight Eisenhower said, this speech shows us that this is a man we can't have leading this newly independent African country. And then within a couple of months, Lumumba was dead. You know, now I'm not saying Eisenhower directly carried it out or ordered it, but U.S. imperialism was clearly involved in it. And this is the way this country has operated. So in relation to the development in Syria, and other people could speak on this too if they want, this is the U.S. stoking up its antagonism with Iran and raising the stakes in that part of the world, which that's the Middle East, but it's not that far from where the Ukraine is, and it's a part of the world that the U.S. has viewed as this is ours, and they feel they've lost some ground that they have been trying to regain for the past couple of decades. That was even Bush II's thing coming into office. We're going to drain the swamp in the Middle East. And they actually said before they went into office, we're going to take out Saddam Hussein. And then after 9/11, they said, okay, here's the reason we're going to take out Saddam Hussein. But they said it before it even happened. So their point was, we're going to take this guy out, and that'll open it up for us to get back in the saddle fully in that part of the world. And this back and forth there has still been going on that level. And it is it's the cauldron of contradictions, cauldron of problems in that part of the world that can very easily explode into out-and-out warfare. I mean, and this was an act of war. When you go and bomb somewhere in a country, I mean, and the U.S. doesn't treat it this way. For them, it's justifiable retaliation. But it was an act of war to go and bomb Syria, and their figuring is nobody can do anything about it. And that's the thing about things can get on a trajectory that is not under their control. Because there may be a response, there may not. The response may happen later, but these things can spiral out of control and create a situation where open warfare is breaking out here or there. Now, this is not a center of conflict that has the potential to move directly to a world war nuclear conflagration thing, because Iran actually doesn't have nuclear weapons, even though the U.S. makes that a part of their thing of going after them. You know, the nuclear threat from Iran. It's actually, Israel's the country in that part of the world that has nuclear weapons. No, I mean, that's just real. That's just the way it is. And again, for the U.S., it's like, well, if our people have nuclear weapons, that's fine. It doesn't matter that they broke international agreements to get them. But that's cool because, well, actually, this is Trump's thing. You know, when he said his people should be allowed to bring weapons to January 6th, he said, because they're not going to shoot me with them. Let them bring them. Well, that's what the U.S. is saying about Israel's nukes. Let them have them. They're not going to use them against us. They'll use them against people we want them to use them against. Okay, the floor is open. I'm going to take another question from Zoom, but if there's anybody here who wants to talk, let me know. How is this war connected with the fascist movement in the U.S. and the pending election? Well, actually, there's a...
Good question.
Yeah. I was going to say, this is a complex question here, because it is actually the case that the fascists grouped around Donald Trump have weighed in against stepping up support for the Ukraine, and some of them have even said the U.S. should back out of it. What is involved here is that there are differences in the U.S. ruling class over how to see the Russian imperialists. So far, the dominant section of the U.S. ruling class views them as, well, actually, they all see them as an imperialist rival. But the U.S. and Britain are imperialist rivals. And you can work with a rival as a junior partner or a senior partner. You just have to recognize who's who and what's what. France is a rival imperialist power to the U.S. But they work, the U.S., Britain, and France work together with the U.S. as the top dog. And there seems to be some forces there who are looking at, well, maybe we could cut a deal with the Russians. Maybe we could work with them, So that's the way in which it fits in there. Now, in doing this, though, these fascists are not anti-imperialist, nor are they anti-war. And people should not be deceived into thinking that that's what that means. Like well, I'm against the war, and Tucker Carlson seems to be against the war. Should we unite with him? Fuck no, we should not. I mean, Tucker Carlson is a white supremacist. He hangs out with Christian fascists. I don't know if he is one or not. I don't know whether he believes any of that stuff, but he hangs with them and runs with them and promotes them. The thing about these fascists is that their approach to it, I mean, you want to throw down on China? Well, they're with you on that. That's an imperialist power that they do want to, join in coming down on. So these fascists are not anti-war. They're not anti-imperialist. But on this particular imperialist, they seem to have some openness to, let's cut a deal with them. Maybe we should throw part of Ukraine to Putin and then sign him on as a junior partner or something like that. So that's how I see that. And in terms of the pending election, that'll be interesting because I don't know if people are aware of this, but the guy who's challenging Trump or looks to be ready to challenge Trump, DeSantis, he came out saying, well, this is just a territorial dispute in Eastern Europe that the U.S. should not get involved in. He has now said, oh, I was misinterpreted. And I support the effort to support Ukraine against Russia. And, there was no misinterpretation. He said that. He said it was a territorial, very clear position, and he's now backed off. I don't know what that's the result of. But that is a question that could become part of this. Okay, some more comment on Syria. Again, the floor is open for people here as well. Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak to this slogan, which I think is an important part of the RevCom call, no war on China. I don't know if people have followed the last 2 days, but there's been an extraordinary situation in Congress where little did any of us know, but TikTok is the major communist operative in the United States. They've been holding hearings, put together by the Republican Party to ban TikTok. And now I see that Utah has passed, the Republicans there have passed a law that you have to be a certain age and you have to verify your age and you can't get on TikTok without essentially government permission. So there's a whole lot tied up in that. But the contention of the Republicans that started this is China is using TikTok to take all of Americans' private data. what a shock, because 10 years ago it was Edward Snowden that had to go to Hong Kong to reveal the fact that it was the NSA and the U.S. government that was stealing all the private data. And where is he now? He had to flee to Russia because this democratic country was going to lock him up forever. There's a big mix going on here, but I feel very certain, and I've heard this in the media the last couple of days, that Chinese Americans in particular are saying this is very, very bad, that anti-Chinese feelings at the level of hate crimes and abuse are coming up, but I think in a much bigger sense. The ruling class is united on this. This turned out to be the biggest so-called bipartisan discussion and hearing in Congress they've had for this whole Congress. All the Democrats but Jamal Bowman are lining up. And Jamal Bowman came out and said, well, wait a minute. Does anyone have any evidence? You've not showed any evidence that China's using any of this data yet. But other than that, there's a lot of unanimity. And I really see this as a very dangerous part of building up war fever in this country. And I think we have to keep it in mind, because what they're saying is the Chinese Communist Party is behind all this. So I think the RevComs have a lot to say about that. Is it a communist party? No, hasn't been for decades. It is authoritarian, and some of the things they're saying about it may have a ring of truth to people, but this is very, very dangerous.
I mean, just one thing I'll add on that. The U.S. government collects a whole lot of data on people through social media and other ways, and it's like, we should spy on you. We don't want some other government to be spying, and we should take care of the spying on you in order to keep you in line. But I think that is a very important point, and I hadn't been looking at it closely enough, but I did see Bowman on TV, and I thought it was interesting that he said, where's the evidence? And nobody, like, the talking head that was dealing with him was being very antagonistic towards his defense of TikTok. How dare you defend TikTok? Are you not a patriotic American? And he finally said, well, I mean, I have yet to see anybody produce any evidence. Have you? And the person got a little flustered and then said, but it's owned by China. It's owned by China. What do I need evidence for? I mean, they didn't say what did I need evidence for, but that was the mood behind it. I need evidence? I'm targeting China. The government there calls itself communist. That's enough. Open and shut case. But I think that's an important part, and it is that you can add to that what the fascists have said around the coronavirus and all like that, the whipping up of anti-China sentiment. And then they also get to tie that into the anti-communism that they've whipped up historically, which may be part of why the fascists feel like, now that's a better target for us to go at. All right, someone, maybe the same person, the same person raised in reference to Syria, could the developments there with the U.S. bombing in Syria in retaliation to what they said was a drone strike that killed a U.S. contractor, could these events be connected to recent Chinese brokered talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran? I mean, I can't really say. I can't say. I mean, I can say that it was not a welcome development by the U.S. that China, which they are trying to basically keep bottled in. You know, they can't do anything about the fact that there is a country, China. They can't take that away right now. They're not in any position to do that. But they can try and keep China bottled up there. And that's brought out by the fact that a lot of the U.S. claims about China acting wrongly internationally have to do with stuff that's like 40 miles off the coast of China. And they're having incidents with U.S. military being too closely followed by Chinese planes and all like that. And look, China is not doing it for the interest of humanity, but you do kind of have to say that if it's 40 miles off the Chinese coast, why are you fucking there? No, I mean, really. What the fuck are you doing there? That's a long way from your territory. But for the U.S., that is their sphere of influence, and they don't want it to be penetrated. So I don't think it was very welcome to them. The Chinese were able to pull together talks between one of their top enemies, Iran, and one of their important allies, Saudi Arabia. That's not a thing that the U.S. welcomed. You know, they're not saying, oh, good, somebody has de-escalated tension in a very critical part of the world. That's not their response to it at all. Okay, and the floor is still open, but I do want to take us back to April 2nd. You know, these horrors, I'm not sure what's going on. Oh. Just go ahead through. It won't bother us. The horrors that we've been talking about tonight focused on the proxy war over Ukraine, the way in which it's dragging the world towards possibly World War III and a nuclear Armageddon, and what that could mean, put a very big challenge before humanity. And this is a challenge that we have to take on. We can't sit back and let it go down and go about our lives. Nor can we say, well, it's a bad thing, explain why it's a bad thing, but just sit on our hands while it's going on. We actually have to step out. We have to challenge other people to step out, because the lineup of forces on this question is very bad right now. You got a lot of people who are swept up in the U.S. thing from a lot of different angles. You've got progressive people who on other things have stood against what the U.S. has done, who are being swept into the U.S. camp by this. You know, well, this time they're doing something good. You know, there are a few of them I could name. Sean Penn is doing that. Little Steven. You know, I guess he used to be in the E Street Band. I guess if it still exists, he's in it.
They just played in Boston 2 nights ago.
Okay, all right. I didn't know that. Thank you for keeping me up to date on cultural developments. No, really, thank you. I didn't know if the band was still together. But he's a significant musician and actor, and I remember him from back in the days of the opposition to apartheid and the role that he played in pulling together musicians to put together an album and to stand on the side of the people in Africa fighting against apartheid. Well, on this, he's saying, well, why can't we bomb the fuck out of the Russian fleet? We're more powerful than they are. Well, so too many people are lining up with them, and too many other people are like, hey, I can just sit this out. This has nothing to do with me. No, this has to do with humanity. This is not something that can be contained off to the side. And we have to challenge people to get them to confront that. And April 2nd is a beginning step in doing that. So I really urge people Like I said, there's a table here. We have material that you can take and begin to get out to others. There will be a meeting here on Sunday, 3 o'clock, right? I got that right? I didn't write it down, so I wasn't sure.
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock? Yes. We're going to form an organizing committee. We're going to bring people together and figure out how to go out and take this message to people. What should April 2nd be like? What should it look like? How can we do something that is impactful and hard-hitting, and something that can become a platform to go forward to May 1st, going out around the same slogans, which are U.S.-NATO, no U.S.-NATO war with Russia, stop U.S. threats against China, no World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. We don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution. These slogans have to become something that people are confronting and being confronted with, and are thinking about, well, is this true? Is there really a threat of world war? Is it really the case that I should be concerned about the U.S., NATO going to war with Russia and the U.S. threatening China? And what future does this system offer to people? And is this a future that we should accept? See, and that's real important at this point, because there are many, many developments. You know, right now there are not a whole lot of people out around revolution. That's just the reality. I wish it weren't so, but it is so. However, there are many, many developments that jolt people out of their everyday life. We saw that last year around the escalation of the attack on abortion rights and the Supreme Court wiping away Roe versus Wade, which drove, in the lead up to it, tens of thousands of people, maybe more, into the streets. We saw it in 2020 in the wake of the police murder of George Floyd, which drove millions of people in this country and millions more around the world into the streets, calling for an end to police murder of black people and calling for an end to white supremacy. And see, what was really significant about that and hit me was that you had all of these people who, before that murder, were going about their lives. This murder was so foul and so clear right before. There was no, well, he says this, but she says that. It was just right there. You saw it. And it drove millions of people to the point of saying white supremacy's got to be ended. That's getting pretty systemic in America. You talk about ending white supremacy in America, you got to get rid of the fucking capitalist imperialist system, because that's poured all the way through it. That's baked right into it. I mean, whatever other analogy you want to come up with, that they are cheek to jowl. That's the way. So people were going for something, were being moved to something very systemic. And in that situation, it becomes possible to take to people not only the need for getting rid of this system through revolution, but we can also take to them the possibility to do that, especially in this rare time. The possibility also being connected to the leadership that there exists, that we have for this revolution, and the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, the strategy for it, a vision of the future society that could be brought into being in the Constitution. So those are things that can really shake up the situation, and they're happening at some level all the time. I mean, I made mention of the emergency response to the abortion medication. I always mispronounce somebody pronounced correctly.
Mifepristone.
Okay, mifepristone is the key drug for medical abortions. And it's the way that most abortions in this country happen. And in fact, when Sarah Taylor, other RevComs, and other people were coming together to put together the resistance to the attempt to get rid of the Roe versus Wade stand of the Supreme Court that legitimized abortion rights, a lot of people told us, oh, you're being alarmist. And don't worry, most abortions happen based upon this medication anyway. So even if they take away Roe versus Wade, it won't make that much difference. And part of the response that Sansara and others gave them is, these people are out to get rid of abortion. They win this battle, they will go forward.
For birth control.
Yeah, they'll go forward to birth control. Well, this isn't birth control, but this is them going forward. They've gone from no longer is there Roe versus Wade, so we can pass these bans in the city where Christian fascist forces, in the states where Christian fascist forces control the government. Well, they're now gone to, we can take down the main way abortion happens in this country. The thing that people told us, well, don't be alarmist because we got that. Well, this is being gone at right now. And this is something that can really jolt people again out of their normal lives. And we have to see that these things create openings to really transform the situation and bring onto the scene as a powerful pole of attraction, a force, a movement that is saying this whole system needs to be gotten rid of. As Avakian said in that quote, humanity can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and determine the fate of humanity. They must be overthrown as quickly as possible. And that's an important part of the orientation that we have to take to this, that we have to be working to challenge and confront people, and also looking to seize on the opportunities that create openings to do that and to make big transformations in the situation. So, again, April 2nd, organizing table in the back, get with it. Sunday, is there a reason you're going for the mic? Sunday, 3 o'clock here at Revolution Books, a meeting to further organize the April 2nd mobilization. We're going to form an organizing committee for it. Be there, get involved, bring your ideas and suggestions for how this could be done. I'm thinking we're getting towards the point where we can end the formal part of this program. Doesn't mean you have to leave. You could hang around and we could talk informally.
And this is Brenda. I've been co-hosting the Zoom, so those of you online have seen my comments if you're watching the chat. If you're not watching the chat, I just want you to know to be part of getting organized for April 2nd, to be part of the movement for revolution. You can email your information to revbooksnyc@yahoo.com. Because I see some new names in the chat. Much appreciated. So please do get hooked up if you want to be on the organizing committee for April 2nd, if you want to be part of the Life of Revolution Books. You are needed. And also that we're going to do Zoom on Sunday. So ask us for, chat in the chat, or make sure that your request is in to get the link for the Zoom. All right, thanks.